Hello students, welcome to week 2 for COM 3.3 oral interpretation. This week we'll be looking into principles and theories related to performance, specifically related to our oral interpretation performance. As we take a look at the week 2 agenda, it's important to see that we are reading chapter 2 on constituting performance, as well as watching 3 oral interpretation videos to help us see some presentations and performances as we prepare for our own oral interpretation performance that we'll be doing week 6. Many of the assignments going forward will involve the oral interpretation project, which is our actual performance in some shape or form. So you'll see a lot of assignments related to that going forward. This week, you are completing weekly review number 2, which is the discussion board. Your original posts are due by Friday, and your reply posts are due no later than Sunday, as well as selecting your topic for the oral interpretation project. As you look at the weekly review, you'll see here that you are required to write at least 350 words in your original post that's answering the 4 questions listed below, as well as replying to at least 2 students with a 150-word responses no later than Sunday this week. So in your actual prompt, after reading the course text, watching the videos, and going through this lecture, you'll need to answer the questions below. What makes a performance? Then set 2, you'll determine the components utilizing primarily the course text for this component. Determine the components that make an oral interpretation performance, as well as clearly explaining the nature of performance and the need to constitute performance through the idea of framing. In addition, you'll discuss the importance of oral interpretation performances as a form of a communication medium. So you will be looking at the importance of why oral interpretation performances are a valid communication medium, or what we call is a form of media, a way to get out information. Do keep in mind the discussion board guidelines that are posted within Blackboard and the discussion board rubric we went over last week, where it gives you the opportunity to, actually we're going to go through the rubric in this lecture as well, where you're really supposed to be utilizing this assignment as a participatory in-class discussion. If you take a look at the discussion board rubric, if you take a look at the discussion board rubric, you'll see here that there are 5 categories that you can score in order to earn an A, B, C, D, and F. I'm not going to read each one verbatim at this point. This is posted within Blackboard. I'm simply highlighting that this is a new university requirement for all professors to utilize this while grading. So it's very important that you keep this in mind while contributing to the discussion boards. In this course, the discussion boards serve as a participation element to our course. They're designed and utilize prompts that would be used if this were a face-to-face class. So this really takes that in-class discussion portion you'd have in a face-to-face class and puts it online. So I do want you to note, though, that to score as an adequate contributor is simply meeting the minimum specific post requirements. To score in the ranges of good contributor or outstanding contributor means you are exceeding the post requirements. So do keep that in mind. It's very important. This is a new protocol that's been set forth by the university, so it's very important that you keep that in mind when scoring, and noticing that sometimes you may get a score of an adequate contributor and you've done everything required. We're looking for good and outstanding contributors to go beyond what is expected. So do keep that in mind, and if you have any questions going forward, that'll be fine. But I look forward to going through the discussion boards forums with you this week. As we look at the next assignment, this week you will be selecting your topic for an oral interpretation project. So essentially, I have a brief, summarization of what the topic selection looks like. So you'll be performing an oral interpretation in the form of a Vimeo or a YouTube in week 6. You will decide to utilize a prose, poetry, or dramatic interpretation, and it's okay if you're not quite sure what that is at this point. You'll know by the time you get to do your performance. And the performance will be recorded and submitted primarily via YouTube, or you can use Vimeo. That's the other accepted format. So this week, you're not doing that this week. This week, you're simply just selecting your topic. So you're going to choose a communication artifact, which will be explained in a second of what that is, that you'll use for your oral interpretation project. This is the first step in the 4-step project to complete this performance. So this week you will, 1, select your artifact to perform in your oral interpretation, and then 2, clearly state how the artifact can be used as an oral interpretation performance using the principles in the course text. And then 3, all of your answers in total, so between 1 and 2, the entire thing will be 200 to 300 words. As you go through this, keep that in mind. Looking at oral interpretation communication artifacts, this will help you with this assignment, is just know that that term is just a fancy term for any piece of communication that could be performed as an oral interpretation. It can be a prose, poetry, or dramatic interpretation, and really what that means is prose is a narrative interpretation, so you're taking some type of nonfiction or biographical text that does not have any type of poetry or dramatic interpretation in it and performing it. So that would primarily be a speech or maybe some portions of a film or a play script, depending on the depiction of that, or a type of literature in that sense. A poetry interpretation is essentially that. It's doing an oral interpretation on some form of poetry or lyric to a song. And then a dramatic interpretation is taking something that's been created for the dramatic arts and interpreting it, doing an oral interpretation of it from a communication perspective. So do keep that in mind. That's covered extensively within the text, and we're going to be referring to that quite frequently as we go forward. This week you are just essentially selecting an artifact, which is any type of communication that you are familiar with and feel you have a strong connection with on the message of that communication piece that you would like to interpret for your oral interpretation performance in week 6. An oral interpretation performance, remember we went through this last week, is just simply an analysis of what you get from that communication piece. Your interpretation is supposed to highlight the meaning and feelings you learned and found while going through that piece of communication. So if you were to if you'll see in, for example, there is a video on The Dark Knight this week. You'll be watching an oral interpretation of that. That is that person's interpretation and analysis of that scene from that particular movie. So keep things like that in mind. That's what we're getting at. If you have any questions or confusions at all on your topic, you can definitely email me. Additionally, this assignment is put in at this point in week 2, so that way you can submit something, and if there happens to be an issue with it or something that I'm not quite sure of what you mean by that particular type of communication, we have plenty of time to go through and find a solid topic before the assignment's actually due in week 6. I wanted to highlight some things from Bauman's Nature of Performance Theory. This is found within the course text this week. We are looking at constituting performance and what the role of performance is within an oral interpretation. And what Bauman tells us is that this performance theory considers 3 constitutive elements of performance. So really what it's saying is the nature of performance centers around 3 things: performance competence, audience evaluation, and heightened experience. And what you need to achieve as an oral interpretation performer as you're performing a piece is keep in mind those 3 things. Does your performance allude to a performance competence? This is an accountability you hold as the performer to the audience to directly and indirectly just demonstrate what you know about your communication artifact. And what that means more specifically is that you need to utilize the ability to engage, hold, and direct the audience's attention, as well as looking at focus and concentration while you are performing a particular piece. The importance of knowing and displaying appropriate attitudes and postures and apt situations within the performance is the way in which communication is carried out above and beyond its basic connection with the audience. So we're looking to see, is the performance competent? Does it clearly provide an interpretation of this text in a way that makes sense? So can the audience make a connection with what your interpretation is of this piece of writing or this speech or this piece of literature or whatever it may be? The second point in Bauman's theory is audience evaluation. This is where the audience, and this is something we do quite naturally when we act as the audience ourselves, evaluates the skill and effectiveness of the performer. Audience evaluation really takes place in a multitude of forms, but it's a constitutive part of performance. So how the audience perceives you, which is usually demonstrated in applause, standing ovation, shouts of bravo, booing, hissing, vegetable throwing, whatever that may be, depending on how they felt the performance was, shows that the audience makes a clear judgment about the performance. Their interpretation of your performance and how it appeals is a part of their evaluation. They play a critical role in the communication factor. If you receive a positive reaction from the audience as opposed to a negative reaction, it shows that what you were trying to communicate went over effectively, or maybe it didn't go over effectively. The third point that Bauman points out to us is heightened experience. This is when the performance itself is marked as an enhancement of an experience through the present enjoyment of intrinsic qualities of the act of expression itself. And so as we look through this, it's very important that when we look at intrinsic qualities, we understand that we're looking at the act of expression in terms of enhancing our experience of the communication piece you are interpreting within your performance. Peggy Phelan has been noted with saying that there's a specialness available in art, and it's a fine line. Without a robust sense of life as something other than art, the term typically collapses and we are left with all performance all the time reality. And it's really important that within performance competence, audience evaluation and heightened experience are all analyzed in a way to determine the effectiveness of the oral interpretation. Remember, oral interpretation is not acting, it's not speech delivery, it's an interpretation of a particular text. So we're taking written text that's usually consumed by reading, not hearing, and bringing it to an oral performance. And so that means we are switching, we're making a cognitive switch here between the way we consume this piece of communication and performing it in a way that's supposed to heighten the experience for the audience. The next point we're going to take a look at is looking at performance through framing. Framing theories particularly are a way of originating, understanding, and interpreting experiences within social interactions. This particular idea is not uncommon within communication. It's how sometimes we understand, interpret, and organize social interactions and assign meaning to those situations. Within performance, it's the same exact thing. Particularly, Goffman's idea of keying is a component of framing that is used regularly within oral interpretation performances. What it does is the performance itself is often framed by the audience. So if the performer keeps in mind for the four particular categories of Goffman's keying idea, it typically will allow the audience to have a favorable evaluation, as well as creating a heightened experience for the performer and for the audience itself. Particularly, Goffman names the process by which a particular frame is evoked as keying. It's his deliberate intention to make sure that a key is a specific code, convention, or language or signal that typically erects a frame around a communication event. Keying is defined as the set of conventions by which a given activity, one already meaningful in terms of some primary framework, is transformed into something patterned, but seen by the participants to be something quite else. So there are four categories of keying. The first one is make-believe. This is where we utilize play, fantasy, daydreaming, dramatic scripting, etc. In the ways of performing our oral interpretations. The next one is prefacing our oral interpretation in the minds of a contest, saying that it takes place in terms of sports and games and things of that nature. Oftentimes you'll see an oral interpreter provide a setting and a little anecdote before the performance starts. They may be providing and setting using keying to do that, telling them that this takes place in a contest between two blah blah blah, whatever it may be. The third one is ceremonials. This is the use of social social rituals, like weddings, funerals, investitures, and things of that nature, to provide a performance frame. The fourth one is technical redoing, simulations and practices and demonstrations, exhibitions, rehearsals, group psychotherapy, role playing, and so on. Goffman names events as king as a form of folklore from around the world, and claims that every speech community will make use of a structured set of distinctive communicative means from its resources of culturally conventionalized and cultural specific ways to key the performance frame. All communication, we'll see, takes place within the frame that is to be understood as a performance within that community. Typically, the performer will preface the key that they're setting with saying, I will now, and then pause and begin to go into their performance. So performers utilize this as an advantage to help with audience evaluation, creating a heightened sense, a heightened experience, as well as demonstrating performance competence. They go hand in hand. These are two ideas from the chapter's text that are relevant this week that will definitely help you with your assignments. To recap, we are in week 2. We're working on reading chapter 2 this week, as well as watching the 3 videos listed. One's a duo interpretation on Finding Nemo. One is the fall 2011 oral interpretation winner in the nation, and the next one is an interpretation of The Dark Knight, a particular scene. As you watch those, keep in mind the idea of constituting the performance frame through King as well as Bauman's theory. We're working to complete weekly review number 2 with our original post due on Friday and our replies due on Sunday, as well as completing our topic selection for our oral interpretation project. I look forward to interacting with you this week, and if you should have any questions, please get in touch with me early on. I pray you all have a blessed week, and God bless.